As you know, education is the #1 priority of the Chamber, and you know the reasons that the Chamber has identified this as the #1 priority. It really stems from the fact that our mission as an organization is to facilitate community leadership to create economic prosperity. And community leadership sets the agenda for the Chamber, and the community leadership has said education is one of the most important components of prosperity there is. And with the current state of education and the need to improve, particularly with the increased standards looming out there in the future for us to address, then it is something that the Chamber is taking a very active role in. One of those active roles is to create the opportunity to gain information from experts, from people who are familiar with various ways to approach education. And this panel will be introduced to you in just a few moments, and they are experts that will bring us a lot of great information.
I'd like to commend the Nashville Area Chamber for having this entire discussion of school governance in Tennessee, and more specifically, the issue of fiscal independence for boards of education. It is a very timely topic, not only here in Nashville, but also throughout the state, as school districts are facing unprecedented accountability and public scrutiny under federal and state performance standards and mandates. And before I dive into the specifics of the topic at hand, I think it's important to take a step back just for a little bit and look at where we find ourselves today in terms of our budget situation. Of course, at the state level, we all know that we are facing tough times. In 2007, the General Assembly adopted a revision to our state funding formula that was designed to provide significant funding increases for our public school systems in Tennessee. Well, unfortunately, with the way the economy has gone, we know that that phase-in approach to the BEP, or that additional money, has been delayed. It's been postponed. We can look at the budget discussions that are going on today. We know that we have a very significant shortfall. We know that next year does not look much better. And if it were not for the stimulus dollars, we would very likely be facing actual cuts in state education funding for the first time since 1991. So we are in a very dire situation today. At the same time, we've also seen a number of local governments throughout the state pull back locally, decreasing the effort that they are providing to public education. And a lot of that also has to do with the economy. And then we also know while all this is going on in terms of funding, we are going to be facing increasing performance standards, accountability measures. Our students are going to be taking a tougher curriculum, and we know that things are going to get worse before they get better. Anytime you increase the curriculum standards, increase the rigor of the curriculum, you can pretty much count on the fact that you're going to have more schools identified as not meeting the standard, not meeting adequate yearly progress under No Child Left Behind. So we know that's going to result in even more public scrutiny, a lot of debate about where we are in education, not only in Nashville, but throughout the state, throughout the country. And so Tennessee is going to be in the thick of this. We are now part of this Tennessee Diploma Project that was referenced earlier. A number of states in the country are part of this American Diploma Project. And it's a very positive thing. We know that it's designed to make sure that our students are learning the things that they need to learn before they get out of high school. And so I think everyone agrees with the concept, but we know that initially at least, we're probably going to see more of our schools on that dreaded list for failing adequate yearly progress. So all of these things taken together are creating this perfect storm, and what I believe highlighting some of the flaws that we have within our governance structure here in Tennessee. And let me just explain further what I'm talking about with that. As a school board, the Board of Education members spend a lot of time, months and months, many hours, debating the school budget, looking at the goals and objectives of the school system, trying to come up with a plan that is going to move the school system forward, that's going to provide a positive opportunity for students. And that's a very lengthy process. It takes months of input from all members of the community, teachers, parents, business leaders, community leaders. And so I know that school boards throughout this state take that very seriously. They're trying to develop a vision for their school systems to move that community forward. But it's at that last step that you see on the slide here, number 4, where Tennessee's system is very much out of line with the rest of the country. And that's where the school board has to present its budget to another locally elected body. And that elected body can then either approve or reject that school system budget and force the school board to go back to the drawing board. Now, we think that that is a flawed system, especially in terms of accountability. We know that in Tennessee, we are under, I mentioned this earlier, under really unprecedented accountability measures. We have the federal No Child Left Behind Act. We have our own state performance and accountability standards. And they are very significant. If you're not aware, and probably most of you are, because I know we're dealing with many of these things here in Nashville today. But if a school district does not meet adequate yearly progress, the performance standards that have been set for a number of years, the state can actually come in and remove staff members, can remove the director of schools or the superintendent, and can remove locally elected school board members. That's pretty substantial. That's a pretty significant penalty when you're talking about removing individuals that have been elected by the community. Now, some people would suggest that the system that we have in place today, where the school board has to present its budget to the county commission, city council, is positive in that it creates this system of checks and balances. And while I would argue that there are many checks and balances on the school board, there really are no checks and balances on the funding body, the county commissions, the city councils, the city legislative bodies. The only requirement that local funding bodies have in terms of state law is, one, that they meet what's called the Basic Education Program funding match. The BEP is the state funding formula. It it's supposed to determine what it takes to provide a basic level of education for all students. And based on an individual county's ability to pay, that determines what a local community must put into that funding formula. Well, we all know, those of us that deal with education funding on a daily basis, we all know that the BEP does not provide anywhere near the amount of resources that it takes to run a school district. The only other requirement that local funding bodies have is that they meet what's called the maintenance of effort requirement. Many of you may be aware of this maintenance of effort term. What that means is that the local funding body must fund at least what it funded the prior year, or probably put in better terms, it must budget at least what it budgeted the year before for the school district. The problem with that is that it doesn't address your basic inflationary costs, your natural cost increases that a school district is going to have. And so, in other words, if a county commission or a city legislative body chooses just to simply fund what it funded the previous year, then that in effect is a cut to the school district, because you're going to have natural cost increases every year. I'm going to skip a couple of these slides here. So, what is the immediate solution? I would suggest to you that the immediate solution would be to address that maintenance of effort definition. This is something that we tried to do in the General Assembly this year to provide an inflationary adjustment. Well, as you can imagine, a lot of concern about that among the local funding bodies, especially in a time like this where the economy is in the shape that it's in. So that legislation did not get anywhere. But what we're trying to do is move away from this budgeted to budgeted level and look at how do we make sure that we attain at least the same educational attainment level that we were able to in the prior year. And that is going to require, at the very least, an inflationary adjustment. That's the immediate solution. It doesn't get us ultimately to where we need to be. So what we're talking about here today is really the long-term solution to some of these problems. First, if we're going to address this, we're either going to have to come up with some innovative ways for school districts to cut costs. I think we're all looking at that. And secondly, we're going to have to look at a fundamental change as to how we fund our schools in Tennessee. And that's where we are today with this forum, is talking about this fundamental change in the issue of fiscal independence and boards of education. Really, there are two options when you're looking at fiscal independence for school boards in Tennessee. The first option is what's called a special school district, and we have a representative from a special school district here, and I know that Kent is going to talk to you about some of the specifics related to his district. But just briefly, just to talk to you about what a special school district is, in Tennessee we currently have 14 special school districts. A special district is very unique in that the school board has much more fiscal authority, in that the school board develops its budget and then determines a tax rate that is necessary to meet the needs of that budget. And then it bypasses the local funding body. The special school district is actually created by a private act that is adopted by the General Assembly here in Nashville. So any changes to the tax rate, and actually the initial tax rate for the school district, are located in the private act that the General Assembly adopts. So these things all come to Nashville, to the state legislature, and they are then approved by the General Assembly. Now, people see it as the school board actually setting the tax rate, but in actuality, it's the General Assembly that's officially doing it when it passes either the initial private act or the amendments to the private act. Now, currently in Tennessee, there is a prohibition on the creation of new special school districts. That was done back in 1982. I'm told it was done because of, not because of anything to do with the taxing authority issue, but because legislators felt like there were too many small school districts that were popping up in West Tennessee. Most of these special school districts are in the northwest part of Tennessee. Now, what the legislation that's been before the General Assembly, what that does is it doesn't create any new school districts. It just allows existing school districts to convert to special school districts. And so the key here is that it addresses the accountability issue. It attempts to give some authority to the elected body that is held accountable for school performance, and that, of course, is the Board of Education. So you get rid of these common funding battles that we often have between school boards and county commissions, city legislative bodies, and the public knows that it's the school board that it can hold accountable. Because in today's system that we have, we see it all the time. The school board will point its finger at the county commission or the city legislative body, and they will say, well, they're not giving us the funding and the resources that we need to improve our school district. And then the funding body will point its fingers at the school board and say, well, they're not using the money that we're giving them efficiently. And the public is left out there with no idea which body to hold accountable. So we are trying to find a system where, because the state law holds the school board accountable, we believe that the state law should give the school board the ability to acquire the resources needed to meet those very accountability standards. So that's the special school district option. The other option is just straight taxing authority for boards of education. This is a more clean option, but it's a more difficult option because it would require a constitutional amendment. Tennessee's Constitution does not currently provide the ability for the General Assembly to give taxing authority, outright taxing authority, to boards of education. And so this would require a constitutional amendment. We know that's a much longer process, but it is a cleaner process in that the board would not have to go through either a local funding body or the General Assembly. The school board would have the authority to set the tax rate within some parameters that could be set within the legislation that's adopted by the General Assembly. And we'll get into more of the specifics as to how this might actually look at the end of the presentation. So the question is, should boards of education in Tennessee, in Nashville, should the Board of Education have taxing authority? And if so, what kind of limitations might be placed on that board? Now, when you talk about this issue in Tennessee, you get a lot of funny looks. People people think it's kind of crazy to talk about the school board having taxing authority. But if you look at the rest of the country, I know this was mentioned earlier, you'll find that Tennessee is in the very small minority of states in which boards of education are not given any ability to raise revenue for schools. Of course, here's a map of the United States, and if you differentiate between those states that give school boards taxing authority and those that do not, it's pretty telling. All of the states in green provide school boards with taxing authority. So Tennessee is one of only 11 states in the country where school boards do not have this ability. When looking at all of the individual school boards, 81% of the school boards in the country have taxing authority. Only 19% do not. All of Tennessee's districts, even the special districts, are considered to be part of that 19% because, again, it's the General Assembly that's actually considered to have the taxing authority. So, is this taxing authority just unlimited? Are there some constraints that are put on the Board of Education? It varies. It varies by state. In some states, it is unlimited. In several states, the school board can go up to a certain percentage, and then anything beyond that would have to go to the voters for approval. And then in some states, any tax increase from the Board of Education would have to be approved by the voters. So it varies all over the country. And then other states have some tax caps or spending caps, and that also places some limits on what the Board of Education can do. Of course, in Tennessee, we would be looking at property taxes and possibly sales taxes as well. You can also possibly could have some wheel taxes and some other things that might be there to address the funding of the school district. Now, there are pros and cons. Anytime you're talking about an issue like this, you're going to have pros and cons. Obviously, I'm kind of biased. I'm a representative of the School Boards Association. We believe that school boards should have this authority, but I'm also going to talk to you about some of the challenges that might exist with a change like this. But first, looking at the pros, I think the number one pro is this clear line of accountability that we've been talking about. It removes these funding battles, removes the finger pointing. The public can determine if the elected school board members are using the resources wisely, and if they believe that they're not, then they can be voted out of office. I think a lot of times people tend to forget that school board members are elected, just like county commissioners, just like city legislative body members, just like state legislators. And if they are not performing, then the public has the ability to remove those individuals. Another important point is the public knows that if there's a tax increase from the Board of Education, that every cent of that tax increase will go to education, to the schools. We see it many times throughout the years in all parts of the state where the county commission or the city legislative body will raise taxes in the name of education, but then when you look at where the money has been distributed once it's raised, a lot of that doesn't actually go to schools. With this, you separate the education tax, and you know that the school board, when it addresses that tax, every cent's going to go to schools. School board members naturally have a much greater understanding of the school district, a much greater understanding of the needs of the school district. Many times, when you look at the funding body, the county commissions, they're looking at a bottom line dollar figure. They're looking at the school budget one time a year. They're not really looking at, and this isn't in every case, I'm not here to berate any individual county commission, but many times they're not looking at how a cut in teachers in a school district is actually going to affect the students in that school district. Board members have a much more intricate knowledge of what that teacher means, of what technology in the classroom means, and what the resources actually mean in terms of the students and achievement. And again, it does remove these unproductive funding battles. Now, some of the cons, there are some cons. People sometimes tell me that they think that this will change school board elections, and that elections will be based strictly on funding issues and taxes rather than the programs or the policies of the school district. And you might run that risk. I think if you talk to the special school districts, they would tell you that has not been the case, but that could happen. Also, people think that this would remove that extra set of checks and balances. I would argue that there really is not a set of checks and balances, that all the power and authority rests with those that hold the purse strings. And we see this many times. State law says that the school board is supposed to have the authority, the ultimate authority, to determine certain things in the school budget, for example, building schools or where the location of a school building will be. But we've seen it countless times where the county commission will say, well, you can have the money if you put the school here. And if the school board refuses, then the money disappears. Those kinds of things happen more frequently than you might think. There is a fear that if you remove the school tax from the other taxes, this is the reverse of what we talked about as one of the pros. It might also be a con in that people think that if you remove the school tax from the other needs of the district, then the people would be not as willing to fund those other things that are needed in the community. And that is a risk. And then people tend to think that if you give another entity taxing authority, that your taxes are going to increase. That is not actually the case. It could happen, of course, but really what we're talking about here is a shifting of the taxing authority from one elected body to another. It doesn't mean that you're going to have an added level of taxation. Now, a question that everybody wants to know is, how is this going to affect achievement? And I wish I could stand up here and tell you that I've got this clear data that shows that if you give taxing authority to school boards, then you are going to have increased achievement. And I can't. I don't have that information. There's really nothing conclusive out there. The only thing that we really have to compare states to states is the NAEP exam. That's the only national exam that states participate in. And if you look at those states that have taxing authority, school boards have taxing authority versus those that don't, there really is nothing conclusive out there that I can point to. It's all across the board. And again, because so many of our states do give school boards taxing authority, it's hard to do this comparison. Again, what I would argue is that we're talking about accountability here. So how would this work in Nashville? First, the special school district option. The first thing that would have to happen is the General Assembly would have to remove the prohibition on the creation of special school districts. After that, the Nashville School Board would have to vote to convert. The school board would take a vote. They would say, we want to convert to a special district. We want to start this process. And then if the board voted to do that, then the school board would have a lot of work to do in getting the local buy-in from the community. Because I guarantee you, this will never happen unless the public buys into it. And the reason for that, the reason I say that is to become a special school district, you have to remember this is going to ultimately have to come to the General Assembly for adoption of a private act. And you can bet that if you are a legislator in Nashville, a state legislator, and you've got a lot of turmoil in your local community, you are not about to introduce this bill and pass it and face the consequences when you are running for election for your state legislative seat. So if you get that local buy-in, if the school board's able to get that local buy-in, then a local act would be developed. It would establish the tax rate for schools. It would establish the boundaries, which would be the existing boundaries. It would address the school debt, and everything related to the school district would have to be addressed in this private act. And then that would come to the General Assembly through a member of the Nashville delegation at the state legislature, and then the General Assembly would have to adopt that act. And at that point, you would have the Nashville Special School District. Now, in terms of outright taxing authority, this would be a more difficult thing to accomplish. The first thing that would have to happen is the legislature in two different General Assemblies would have to pass a resolution that would give the General Assembly the authority to provide school boards with taxing authority. And you can kind of look back to the lottery. That was our last constitutional amendment. And you remember we had to go through two General Assemblies where the first year you have to have the resolution adopted 3 times by 50% or by majority, and then the next General Assembly has to be adopted 3 times by a 2/3 majority, and then it goes to the voters in the next gubernatorial election. So that would have to happen. The voters would have to approve the constitutional amendment, and most likely that constitutional amendment would just simply give the General Assembly the ability to provide school boards with taxing authority. So once that was done, then we would have to come back and the General Assembly would have to pass a bill that would set the specifics as to how this would apply here in Tennessee. And that's where the General Assembly would address whether or not there would be limitations placed on that taxing authority for school boards. If that were done, then, and that legislation were passed, then the Nashville School Board would develop its budget. It would look at the budgetary needs or the resources that would be needed to meet that budget, and of course taking in the financial constraints of the community, and it would have a budget. It would adopt a tax rate, it would have a budget, and what most likely would happen is the Metro Council would then reduce the taxes that it is currently levying for school purposes. I think the public would probably be pretty upset if that tax continued to be in place. So really, you're talking about a shifting of authority. And that completes my presentation. I'll just wrap up and again just thank the Nashville Area Chamber for having this discussion. I think you're going to hear some good information, some more specific information from our other panelists, and then I'll be here to answer questions at the end.
As Stephen said, we ultimately answer to the state legislature. And that's why I put the good names of our legislative delegation there, because these folks are very vital to us in terms of how we govern. And we go to them for such things as bonded indebtedness. In other words, we get ready to build or remodel a school. We can't just say, oh, okay, we'll go out and sell bonds for $30-something million to build some schools. We have to pass that through our Davidson County delegation. It has to go to the full General Assembly as a private act, and it not only sets the amount, but it also sets the tax rate related to bonded indebtedness. When it comes to the whole area of general purpose monies, our particular private act has a cap on it of $1 per $100 of assessed value. So that at that point, as long as our general purpose tax rate is below $1, we do not have to go to the General Assembly or to our delegation to get a private act passed to do that. That keeps from clogging up the process too long. We're all A's in achievement for 2008. We received all A's and B in academic gains over the previous year, placing us in the top 10 in the state. And for the years 2005, 6, and 7, we received all A's in both categories of academic achievement and growth, and we're one of only 3 districts in the state to accomplish that. So when we start to look then at how we're able to do some of this, we look at our performance. And our performance is that we have a AA2 bond rating from Moody's. Makes it much easier for us to borrow money when it comes to doing school construction. Our average teacher salary is 6th in the state at $53,518, and we're very proud of the fact that at $11,392.42 per pupil, that we rank #1 in pupil expenditure for the state. Now, when you look at average teacher salaries across the state, I think what I wanted you to see was the correlation between the fact that we're the only special school district that is in the top districts across the state. and wanted you obviously to see where we related to Davidson County as well as to the state average. Top districts in local funding. 65% of all of our money is generated locally. And this is a state ranking, and you can see that Metro ranks second. So if we are generating 65% of our money, we feel like we ought to have control over that money. We also, our local share comes from our property tax, it comes from other permits, etc., and it also comes from our pro rata share of Williamson County property tax, which was 18% in 1994, and because of Williamson County growth is now 11%. I just threw in Shelby County and Memphis in there just for y'all's edification. We just have celebrated our 100th anniversary. 1925, the state legislature created the Franklin Special School District after the city decided they didn't want to be in education anymore. And the boundaries were set, and a special tax was set, and we had autonomy over hiring and firing and setting salaries and appointing superintendents. Then in 1949, the Private Act of 1925 was amended to allow us to grow along with the city of Franklin's boundaries. It limited our authority to control education below the grade of high school. So that's how we got to become a K-8 district, and gave us power and control over our own budget and taxing. In 1987, the Private Act froze the existing boundaries of FSSD, and so we're built out now in 2009. We're built out except for some infill partials. So following completion of 8th grade, our students go either to Franklin or Centennial High School. One of the questions that was for me was where our tax rate is, and you can see that what it has done. The green bars obviously represent where there has been reassessment and reappraisal. So at that point, our current tax rate for an FSSD household is $3.60, of which $2.03 is the county, $43.04 is the city of Franklin tax, and ours is $1.14. So we have been blessed to be where we are, however, because in 2001, a penny of our tax generated $76,441. In 2008-09, a penny of our tax generates $143,000. So that's part of the reason. I just wanted, sometimes you talk all this stuff and you get it down. What does it cost me? And that's what our citizens ask us. And so I just threw in here what it actually costs to in the way of tax for a typical FSSD resident. We set the tax rate after we know how much money we're getting from the state, what our pro rata share is from the county, and how much money we're getting from the federal government. And it's at that point we set the tax rate in July and then implement the budget. Okay. I was also asked to talk about the history of our operating budget. Our operating budget has grown from $24 million in 2000 to $39 million in 2008-09. I can tell you that for 2009-10 it will be no higher than $39,420 because the board in session in January, because of what was happening in the economy, directed the director of schools to bring us a budget that had no tax increase in it for 2009-2010. How does FSD board function differently from a board without taxing authority? I don't know. I know what ours is. There is, and I know what I experience in reading the press in Williamson County and seeing the press. There's less politics because there can be no blame games. We funded. We have to stand before the taxpayers. But one of the things that we think is key is the fact that our board receives no compensation. So when we set your tax rate, we're not putting any money in there for ourselves. The other thing is that we have to keep a balanced focus because 66% of the voters in the Franklin Special School District do not have children in our district. And the other thing in our situation that is unique is the fact that we are all elected at large to serve the entire district. So I'm not trying to put in money to build up the school where the kids in my neighborhood are zoned. So, and ultimately, we manage our objectives. Okay. How does FSSD Taxation Authority strengthen accountability? I think in our case it strengthens accountability because we almost, just with the four things there you can read, where I want to come down is that I think if Metro is interested in this, I think the special school district is the way to go. For one thing, the state legislature is the one that is mandated by the Constitution to be responsible for education. You have that option to, and I think it's maybe a little more complicated, it's not as clean as what Stephen was talking about, but I think ultimately is probably the best way to get to that. So with that, I think you'll have some questions later on. This is our website, www.fssd.org. We're open 24/7, 365, and come for a virtual visit, or we'd love to have you come down for a real visit.
Good afternoon. I'm Julia Burnett, and I'm from Fulton County, Georgia. That's the area surrounding the city of Atlanta. This is a quick snapshot of what our school system looks like. We're 90,000 students. We are a 7-member, all-female board with a female superintendent. And our superintendent was the previous deputy superintendent in Mr. Wilbanks' district in Gwinnett County, so we're always very grateful to Mr. Wilbanks. We are bisected by the Atlanta Public School System, so we are a non-contiguous school district. We have roughly 60% of our district is on the north side of Atlanta, 40% is on the south side, and it's 75 miles from one end of the district to the other. So we've got some unique challenges. We are everything that you can imagine. We have rural, urban, suburban, rich, poor, many different languages. You can see our breakdown of economically disadvantaged students with disabilities, ELL, and then ED is economically disadvantaged. Quickly, that's a quick snapshot of the number of total economically disadvantaged students that we have. The Board of Education's role is really to work with guidance from the superintendent and the staff after evaluating the needs of the system. And actually, Stephen and Kent set a good stage for what we do as well. We're facing the same kind of tough economic times. We are also in Georgia adopting more rigorous standards, and Georgia is also part of the American Diploma Project. We have a calendar that is set to help standardize and guide our process. It's something that the community has learned to understand over time, and we always provide an opportunity for public input. This is just a comparison of millage rates in the metro Atlanta area. The millage rate is determined by the value of the tax digest, and we call them mills because it's a 1,000th of the tax digest, so that if our tax digest was determined to be $300 billion, then one mill would be worth $30 million, and the value of a mill is determined by each individual county. Many of our school systems have a millage cap of 20 mills that they cannot go beyond. There are a few that are grandfathered in for 25 mills. Now, having the ability to levy taxes locally gives us flexibility to provide for the needs of the individual school districts. In Georgia, we've also got something that's called the Taxpayer Bill of Rights. And what that means is that any taxing on any increase in an assessment value is looked on as a tax increase. So if your house is worth $100,000 this year, next year it's reappraised and it's worth $120,000. If the school system tries to tax you on $120,000, that's considered a tax increase. So in order for us to be able to raise our taxes, even with reassessments, we have to publicly advertise that 3 different times and allow for public comment. So our only real growth comes from new development. This is a sample of our millage rate, and you can see in the last 12 years, Fulton County has continued to decrease our overall school tax millage rate. And this year we also, in spite of everything else, are not looking at a tax increase. We're looking at a rollback. This is a breakdown of what our taxes fund. Maintenance and operations, by far our largest portion. We did incur some debt in the 1990s with some bonds that we're still paying off, and we're hoping to pay those off by 2018, I believe. And then there's a small portion that's dedicated to capital, and it's offset by our ability to collect local option sales tax funds for construction. This is a copy of what our tentative budget is for this year, and you can see that our cost per student has stayed within a couple of $100s of last year. Since 2003, we have faced austerity cuts from the state in the portion of money that the state funds from us. And this is where the downside of being able to be your own taxing authority comes in. A lot of times the tax burden is passed on to local systems. So when the state reduces money from us, we've got to make it up out of local funds. And you can see since 2003, Fulton County, only my school system, has lost almost $108 million in austerity reductions. And again, the result of this is more of a shifting of the tax burden to local school systems. Roughly 65% of our tax base comes from local dollars as well. In the Metro Atlanta system, the large systems in Metro Atlanta, with the exception of the Atlanta Public School System, which is along the top, we're all sort of bunched together in what our cost per student is. We're fairly close in a range there. This is where our money comes from. As I said, 65% is from local dollars, and the 1% that's other is special grants and things like that we can obtain. Fulton County uses, as part of our strategic plan, a balanced scorecard where we measure things like student achievement, and within that we include different types of tests and other results that we measure. We try to set targets every year, and you can see, very tiny there, the green areas are where we exceeded our targets. The yellow area is where we came within a close range. The red areas are areas that we did not meet our targets, and we evaluate that during the year. Staff evaluates as different tests and other scoring mechanisms come in, and every year in the fall we review this as a board and set our new priorities for the next year. This shows our cost per student relative to our SAT scores, and this is a grid that plots efficiency and cost per student against effectiveness or the outcome of SAT scores. You want to be in that bottom right-hand quartile where the green is, and you can see that both Fulton and Gwinnett County are in that bottom quartile. This is what it looks like for our graduation rate. Same thing, both Gwinnett and Fulton are in that green area, so we're achieving results with applying what we feel like local tax dollars are helping to supplement our efforts. Disaggregating the data, again, just shows you that even with SAT scores, we've continued to make gains in Fulton County, although at the state and the national level, the scores haven't quite kept up with what we've been able to do. With our criterion reference tests, those are based on our state standards. Over time, we're also seeing success that it just allows us to provide more resources where they know that they'll be needed to achieve our end results, which are having students achieve to their full potential. Thank you.
Here's a slide that I really want to talk to you in terms of whether or not the Board of Education has the right to levy tax to fund its programs. Look first of all at what our millage rate is for the school district, 19.25. That's for the daily operation of the schools. In other words, it costs about $5 million a day for us to operate schools. People ask me about, well, are we going to have a 12-month school year? I say, well, it's $5 million a day. How many more days you want? I don't think we're going to be adding many more days. We have a 1.3 mil for debt service. We're in the midst of we're in, I guess, the fourth year of a $2.7 billion building program. Okay, since I became superintendent, we built 57 schools. We have 9 opening this year, new schools, and 1 replacement school. Be 8 next year. We also have a 1% sales tax, as many of you know. Of course, with the economy as it is, that's down. We're running about 70% of projection. It spikes up and down a little bit. Last month, I think that 1% sales tax brought in about just under $13 million. Now, the bad news is we were projecting that $2.7 billion building program wanted bringing in about $16 million for the month. But look at the county budget, 9.72 mils. Now, the county is in the process now of having public hearings, and they're raising their budget, I think, about 2.72 mils. So that probably will be up. The reason I show you that and why I want to start with it, first of all, Gwinnett County Public Schools, or most school district, has one source of revenue, and that's property tax. The counties, and matter of fact, we have a good relationship with our county commissioners, same thing with the mayor, city council. They're good people. They have a lot of things to do. But their millage rate is 9.72. And they ask me every now and then, why can't you operate with a little lower millage? And I have to remind them, well, you've got about 26 or 27 other sources of revenue. They're called water meters, license fees, and you just go on and on. Now, like I said, I don't say that in a negative sense. It costs money to pave streets and do all those things. But look at it just from a psychological viewpoint, just a mindset. Big difference. So sort of chalk that up as one reason that I really think with the school board having that taxing levy, you can do much better, and you don't get into these headbutting, the argument of who's responsible, who's accountable, who's doing the best job, who isn't doing the best job. So I think that alone sort of sets the context in which you have to defend or operate in terms of funding. This is a millage rate history. We have not been able, my board's philosophy, by the way, I have 5 board members, all great people, very different. One's a medical doctor, one's a contractor, having a tough go right now, like all contractors are. One is just dedicates a life to schools, just was elected to the 10th 4-year term on the board. One is a college vice president, and one has raised 6 kids. All of them went through the school district, and just a great civic worker, and does a great job. The board's philosophy is if we have to raise millage to fund our programs and services, we're willing to do it. If we can lower them, we want to lower them. Nobody ever remembers when you lower them, but they have. You'll note that sometimes the debt service, of course the debt service is a little misleading. You have to lower the debt service. You can only collect enough to service your indebtedness. But we have lowered the budget. The political environment that I think I would just mention here as it relates to the taxing authority. I think any board that has taxing authority has to think and communicate strategically. Everything can't be a rush. You know, you can't this year have a deficit, next year have a surplus. First of all, a deficit, in my opinion, is a no-no anyway. However, you have to look at it 3 to 5 years. You have to communicate that. You have to build confidence and credibility with the public to let them know you can manage the budget, and it can be managed well. Certainly the superintendent and board have to work together on that. And then you have to focus on the budget as an investment document. If you just get hung up in the figures, the dollars and cents, you sort of lose sight of what it's about. The budget is to fund what it is you want to do. Maybe you want to lower per pupil ratio in the early primary grades. Or maybe you want to do as our board did in 2000. We really want to make sure that we give every elementary teacher a common planning time. That took, at the time, about $9 million just to do that one thing. But that was a focus. That's what they decided they wanted to do. And why do you want to do that? Just give them a period off? No, we believe a common planning time allows them to plan together to really look at student achievement across the grade level, across the school, and make a difference. It's those kinds of things that you look at. That's what the budget really funds, is what it is you want to do. What are your goals, objectives, your priorities, and strategies? And then the taxing authority, we feel, strengthens the accountability of a Board of Education. Be accountable when you raise the millage when necessary. Lower it when you can. Build community support, being good stewards of taxpayer dollars. Be astute financial planners. Have a 3 to 5 year picture. There are things that I think boards can do, and the superintendent board team, and it is really a team. You know, I never forget that we're a partnership. However, superintendent's a junior partner when the board's in session. Okay? I never forget that. But the fact is, we all have to work together, and we have to make sure that we got a handle and looking ahead at 3 to 5 year window. And if you, any of you, and probably some of you are in financial business today, you say 5 years out, who knows? Well, that's true. However, some good thinking on that line is better than nothing. You update it. We used to say we update it every year. We're now updating things every quarter, just to make sure we keep a handle on it. So it's that rolling move out where things aren't such a surprise to you. And I think that's where you have to build that credibility. And if a board can do that, they can actually sell a community on a tax increase. We hear people say and y'all have probably heard this argument, well, one of the reasons we wouldn't want the board to have tax authority, we're afraid if they raise taxes, they might get put out of office. I just told you, Ms. Radloff's been elected 10 times, 4-year term. So Dr. Seconder and Dr. McClure and Mr. Secretary, they're completing their 4th term. Dr. Murphy is in her 4th term, just re-elected in November. So it's all a matter of how you present it, how you sell it, how you communicate it, build that credibility, and make sure that you are getting results. Accountability goes from the board to the classroom, from the classroom to the board. So I want to just end by saying that if you're trying to build a case for board taxing authority, here's what I'd sell it on. I think it empowers the board to set the district's direction and secure the financial resources to pursue it. I think it encourages a more strategic outlook in terms of all kinds of planning, but certainly financial planning. It promotes accountability for the results achieved at all levels in the organization. It helps the board to move more easily communicate its direction, its plans, its needed resources and accomplishments. You all know, you get in a meeting, and if you have a meeting just where you're trying to think through some things, and if the press is there, and if there's any press here, I don't mean this in a negative sense, but he'll show up the next morning as a headline, they're going to do this. But I think you have to communicate strategically. You have to say where you're going. If you don't, people can't follow you. They won't support what you need in order to get there if they don't know where you're going. And then you promote the use of best practices in both teaching as well as the school district's operation. You don't want to run a school like a business, but you sure do want to run your fleet management, your maintenance and operations, and your food service like a business. They tell me we serve about 135,000 lunches every day. And I sure hope we're doing that in a business-like manner, where we can have more funds to put on teaching and learning. So I think a board having taxing authority, there are many opportunities for it to really address the critical needs of our schools, and that is the teaching and learning, student achievement piece. Thank you very much.
This has been one of the most informative meetings we've had on this issue of governance, and I really want to thank our speakers, especially those who came from Georgia up here to talk to us. And we have time for a couple of questions.
This is for Stephen. I know from your very excellent notes that there was an effort in the legislature this year to get changed, and it just stalled out. What's your projection for this having any chance of passing in the legislature?
Well, I would say that the special school district option has a much better chance at this point. We seem to be getting more support for that option each year. Obviously, it's a lot easier because it does not require a constitutional amendment. Really, we just have started the dialogue on the constitutional amendment issue, and there was a resolution introduced this year to start that process. It's been referred to a study committee. So you can kind of look at the lottery. I mean, that took over 25 years. We have work to do as school boards and as an association to try to educate the public as to why this would be a positive measure. We have work to do with the legislature as well, and part of that will come through our communication with the public. But we're not there yet in terms of passing the legislation either way, but I think we are moving closer on the special school district option.
Steve Turner, he chairs our high school, middle school redesign advisory committee. Steve, thanks for joining us in your leadership there. And of course, Sam Howard, the outstanding work that he does with our Education 2020 Leadership Council. And again, I also want to thank the leadership of our teachers union, MNEA, Eric and Stephen, for joining us today. And thank all of you, but a special thanks again for our panelists, several of which traveled a long distance to be here today. We really appreciate you sharing your expertise and your perspective with us and helping us through this conversation today. Thank you.
So, do you have any questions?
What is your soup of the day?
We have a mulligatawny soup.
Oh, do you have any specials?
We have a steak special today.
Oh, how's that cooked?
That's pan-seared and then...
Does it come with a side dish? Is it grilled? Can I have it steamed? So what do you recommend? What kind of pie do you have?
You an actor.
Aren't you from Ohio?
Any questions?
Ask questions. For the 10 questions everyone should know, go to ahrq.gov.
The odds of this daughter of a clergyman spending 11 weeks at #1 on the U.S. singles charts? 1 in 19 million. The odds of going on to win 6 Grammy Awards? 1 in 1.4 million. The odds of having a child diagnosed with autism, 1 in 150. I'm Toni Braxton. Learn the signs of autism at autismspeaks.org.
G morning, sunshine. Wakey, wakey. You up? What'd you dream about? Me? JK. Text me back. I'll keep texting till you wake up. Are your parents home later? Is this something I did? Exclamation point, question mark? This isn't a joke. Hello? Text me.